Every single day, billions of dollars worth of goods move across the planet. Cargo ships, freight planes, warehouse systems, customs clearances, retail distribution networks. And the system tracking all of it, in most cases, still runs on paper documents, manual data entry, and phone calls between logistics coordinators who are working off information that is hours or days out of date. The global supply chain, which is the backbone of every economy on Earth, is running on infrastructure that was designed for a world that no longer exists. And quietly, without most people in crypto paying attention, a small number of blockchain networks are being evaluated by some of the largest logistics and enterprise companies in the world as the foundation for replacing that broken system. One of those networks is Hedera. And what is happening around Hedera right now is not a speculative story. It is an infrastructure story, the kind that takes years to build and decades to matter. If you want to understand what enterprise blockchain adoption actually looks like in practice, this is the video you need to watch. Let's start with what Hedera actually is, because it is genuinely different from most blockchain networks in ways that matter for enterprise adoption. Hedera is not a traditional blockchain in the technical sense. It uses a consensus mechanism called hash graph, which is a directed acyclic graph technology that processes transactions in a fundamentally different way than proof of work or proof of stake systems. The practical results of that difference are significant. Hedera can process thousands of transactions per second with finality in seconds, at a fraction of the cost of most other networks, and with extremely low and predictable transaction fees. For an enterprise building a supply chain tracking system that needs to log millions of data points every day at a fixed, budgetable cost, those properties matter enormously. But the technical architecture is only part of what makes Hedera interesting to enterprises. The governance model is the other part. Hedera is governed by a council of some of the largest companies in the world, including Google, IBM, Boeing, LG, Deutsche Telekom, and others. That governance structure means that no single entity controls the network, that there is accountability built into the system, and that the companies sitting on the governing council have a direct stake in the network's reliability and long-term development. For a Fortune 500 company evaluating whether to build critical logistics infrastructure on a blockchain network, knowing that other Fortune 500 companies are governing that network is a very different risk profile than building on a decentralized network with anonymous validators. Now let's talk about the FedEx angle, because this is one of the most concrete examples of where enterprise blockchain adoption is actually heading. FedEx, one of the largest logistics companies in the world, has been exploring Hedera's infrastructure for digital supply chain applications. The reason comes down to something that sounds simple but is actually profound. The problem that global logistics companies face is not a technology problem at its core. It is a trust problem. When a shipment moves from a manufacturer in one country through a freight forwarder, onto a cargo ship, through customs in another country, into a distribution center, and finally to a retail location, there are dozens of different organizations involved in that journey. Each one has its own systems, its own data formats, its own incentives, and its own version of what happened at each step. The result is a system where the same shipment can have conflicting records in 5 different databases, where disputes take weeks to resolve, and where fraud and errors are extraordinarily difficult to detect in real time. What a distributed ledger like Hedera offers is a neutral, shared record that no single participant controls, but that every participant can trust. When a shipment is logged on Hedera, that record is immutable, time-stamped, and visible to every authorized party in the chain simultaneously. You do not need to trust FedEx's version of events versus a supplier's version of events, because there is one version, written in a record that neither party can alter after the fact. That is not just a technology upgrade. That is a fundamental change in how trust is established in commercial relationships, and it is why companies like FedEx are paying attention. Here is where the regulatory environment becomes a direct driver of demand. And this is a piece of the story that most crypto commentators completely ignore. The European Union has passed regulations requiring what it calls digital product passports for a wide range of consumer and industrial goods by 2027. A digital product passport is essentially a digital record that travels with a physical product throughout its entire life cycle, from raw material sourcing through manufacturing, distribution, retail sale, and eventually end-of-life disposal or recycling. The regulation applies initially to categories like batteries, textiles, and electronics, but the framework is designed to expand significantly. The goal is to give consumers and regulators verifiable information about where products come from, what they are made of, and what their environmental and social impact is. Compliance is not optional. Companies selling into the EU market will be required to maintain these records and make them accessible. Now here is why this matters for Hedera specifically. A solution called Track and Trace is being developed on the Hedera network to address exactly this requirement, and it is being developed in partnership with PwC, one of the largest professional services firms in the world. PwC's involvement is significant because it means the solution is being built with enterprise compliance requirements at the center, not as an afterthought. When a regulation with this level of scope and enforceability creates demand for a specific type of blockchain infrastructure, it is not a speculative use case. It is a compliance mandate with a deadline. Every company selling into the EU market in the affected categories will need a solution. The companies that build that solution on credible, enterprise-grade infrastructure are the ones that will capture that market. Let's talk about the institutional side of this story, because the financial infrastructure around Hedera has been developing in parallel with the enterprise adoption story, and together they paint a picture of a network that is being taken seriously at multiple levels simultaneously. ETF inflows into Hedera-related products have shown notable strength, with net inflows of approximately $93 million recorded, and the pattern of those flows has been unusually stable compared to what you typically see in crypto ETF products during their early periods. Canary Capital, an institutional investment firm, has accumulated a Hedera position valued at approximately $562 million. That is not a retail trade. That is a deliberate institutional allocation into a specific infrastructure thesis. Beyond the financial flows, Hedera has joined the Crypto Council for Innovation, which is a policy and advocacy organization that includes companies like Coinbase and Fidelity among its members. Membership in the CCI means Hedera is now participating directly in the conversations that shape regulatory policy for the digital asset industry in Washington. And through its alignment with the Global Blockchain Business Council, Hedera has been identified alongside Quant as one of the foundational pillars of enterprise-grade distributed ledger technology adoption. These are not marketing announcements. These are the kinds of institutional relationships and policy positions that take years to build and that create the conditions for long-term, large-scale adoption. Now let's talk about the Axelar partnership, because this addresses one of the most persistent criticisms of enterprise blockchain adoption, which is the problem of fragmentation. Right now, the blockchain ecosystem consists of dozens of major networks, each with its own token standard, its own smart contract language, its own validator set, and its own liquidity pool. For a business that wants to build on blockchain infrastructure, this fragmentation creates a serious problem. If your supply chain partners are using different networks, if your financial counterparties are operating on different chains, if the DeFi liquidity you need is distributed across multiple ecosystems, then operating on a single blockchain network becomes a limitation rather than an advantage. The Axelar integration solves this by connecting Hedera to more than 60 other blockchain networks through a protocol that enables secure cross-chain messaging and asset transfers. What that means in practice is that a company building on Hedera does not have to choose between Hedera's enterprise-grade performance and the broader liquidity and functionality of the multi-chain ecosystem. Assets and data can move between Hedera and other networks without relying on the traditional bridging infrastructure that has historically been a significant security vulnerability in cross-chain operations. For enterprise applications specifically, this interoperability is critical. A supply chain solution that can communicate with a financial settlement network on a different chain, or that can connect to a decentralized identity system built on yet another chain, is far more useful than a solution that operates in isolation. The Axelar partnership positions Hedera as a hub that can participate in the broader blockchain ecosystem rather than competing against it. Here is what the developer activity data tells you, because this is the metric that serious infrastructure investors pay attention to more than almost any other. In the 30-day period measured, Hedera ranked first globally in developer activity across the entire cryptocurrency and blockchain space, ahead of Chainlink, Avalanche, Stellar, IOTA, and dozens of other projects. Developer activity is a leading indicator of platform health because it measures the actual work being done to build, improve, and expand the capabilities of a network. A network with high developer activity is a network where real problems are being solved, where new applications are being built, and where the technical foundation is being continuously strengthened. The combination of high developer activity, enterprise governance, institutional financial flows, regulatory compliance infrastructure, and major partnership announcements creates a picture of a project that is operating at a genuinely different level of maturity than most of what you see in the crypto space. The supply chain and digital identity use cases that Hedera is pursuing are not fast-moving, high-volatility opportunities. They are slow, methodical, compliance-driven infrastructure build-outs that take years to reach full deployment, but that, once deployed, tend to be extremely sticky. The companies that integrate Hedera into their logistics systems, their compliance frameworks, and their financial settlement processes are not going to switch networks every 6 months. The switching costs are too high and the reliability requirements are too strict. That stickiness is exactly what long-term infrastructure value looks like. Step back and look at the full picture of what we have covered, because the individual pieces of this story are interesting on their own, but the pattern they form together is what really matters. You have a network with enterprise-grade technical performance, governed by some of the largest companies in the world. You have a concrete regulatory mandate, the EU Digital Product Passport requirement, creating real, non-optional demand for blockchain tracking infrastructure by 2027. You have one of the world's largest logistics companies evaluating the network for supply chain applications. You have PwC building compliance solutions on it. You have institutional capital flowing into ETF products built around it. You have cross-chain interoperability connecting it to the broader blockchain ecosystem. And you have developer activity at the top of the entire industry. None of this guarantees any particular outcome. Infrastructure projects move slowly, regulatory timelines shift, partnerships do not always translate into deployment at scale, and the competitive landscape for enterprise blockchain continues to evolve. But the structural conditions for meaningful enterprise adoption are more clearly in place for Hedera right now than they have been at any previous point in the network's history. The transition from paper-based supply chains to digital trust networks is not a question of whether it will happen. It is a question of which networks will be trusted to carry that infrastructure when it does. That question is being answered right now, and the answers are worth paying close attention to. This video is for educational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Nothing discussed here should be interpreted as a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any financial asset. Always conduct your own research and consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decisions.